best understanding of the current situation. We are grateful to have our local political leaders on the call with us today, as well as Rocco Rossi, the OCC president. And we're looking at the one-year outlook based on current economic projections. It is intended to provide certainty to hospitals, schools, municipalities, and the other partners for the upcoming year. So in a second, I'll ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll go directly, shortly after that, we'll go into our Q&A. And for those of you that are online here on the Zoom, to submit a question, please choose the Submit Question to Moderator option with your Zoom platform. Type out your question, and I will read your question directly to our panel for response. So I'll just start in no particular order and who I saw first. So MPP Andrea Khanjin, if you want to give a quick introduction.
Yeah, well, I'll make it short and sweet. Again, Andrea Khanjin, MPP for Barrie Innisfil. Thank you again to the Chamber and everyone involved in putting this together. I know it takes quite the team, so I want to thank everyone for participating today, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, Doug Downey.
Yeah, I'll follow the same lead and just Barrie Innisfil, or Barrie Springwater Oro-Medonte, and the MPP and Attorney General. Yeah, thrilled to be here. Looking forward to some good questions and talk about what our government has released yesterday and some of the things that have been rolled out before that to support people and businesses and our communities, the healthcare in particular, and we've got lots to talk about. So maybe we'll let the questions drive it because I think there's a lot of interest.
Yeah, excellent. And Rocco Rossi, OCC President.
Well, Todd's done the job, so over to the questions.
Actually, what we're going to start with, the agenda that the Chamber gave me, and if I don't follow it, I'll get my wrist slapped. So we'd like to start with Andrea, then we'll move into Doug. And if you could just give us a few minutes overview on your perspective or take from the announcement yesterday from the Finance Minister.
Sure. So we said before as a government that we're going to be taking an approach that includes 3 buckets, and that's increasing resources to our healthcare system, direct supports for people, and the third bucket being actions to protect jobs in our economy. I've said this a few times, but the province is really focused on protecting jobs as the federal government is going to fill the void of protecting income support. So we have to look at our economic statement in that set of mind. Federal government providing income support, provincial government protecting jobs. The first thing we did, as many of you know, is we introduced the Protecting Workers Act, which ensures no one loses their job because of the COVID-19 epidemic that we're having right now. That was really important. So all of our labor folks and experts are very busy here because of that, but it's the assurances that we had to guarantee. So part of that yesterday that you saw in the update was the fact that we wanted to deliver on those buckets. So overall, you saw $17 billion worth of resources dedicated to combat this pandemic. You had $3.3 billion to support our healthcare, $3.7 billion for people and jobs, and $10 billion for jobs. 10 billion for businesses and cash flow. Cash flow is something we heard loud and clear. I've heard it a lot. I know MPP Doug Downey has heard it a lot too, to help with that. I will note that this is a healthcare, a health pandemic. And so we have to understand that that has to be priority number 1. The faster we get kind of alignment on the health side of this and be able to curb this issue, the faster we can open up our doors and run businesses again. So I will say that the healthcare supports that we did announce yesterday is in addition to what we already did, which is $304 million to support whether it's long-term care or nursing homes and our hospitals. So that's really important because if we do the proper investments there in healthcare, the dividends will follow into our business community. And so I do ask for everyone's patience as we do get through this epidemic together.
Andrea? Doug, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do actually. I want to emphasize that, as the Finance Minister said, this is phase 1 for us. We're reacting in real time. And it may be interesting for people to note that we didn't call it a budget yesterday. We called it a fiscal update, a financial update, because a budget has multi-year projections on it. And we wanted to be realistic in terms of what was in the document. So it really has, it's kind of like a 1-year budget. And there are some projections in terms of growth, which we've set at 0% for this year, and then 2% for each of the years after. It's a very, I'll say, conservative approach in how we do it. And then the contingency fees or contingencies that we put in there, $1 billion strictly for COVID and healthcare, another $1.3 billion, which is your normal contingency, and then about a $2.5 billion, which is an unheard of historic contingency built in, so that we can read and react in real time as things go forward. But we also are doing regulations and doing orders, emergency orders, to deal with red tape and pieces that are getting in the way. And that's an iterative process. Cabinet's meeting every single day, sometimes twice in a day. Those meetings can last 2 and 3 hours. So we're really turning our minds to how people are being affected every single day. And what you saw in the fiscal update was the result of some of that. Reduced hydro rates, so off-peak rates. You saw employer health tax reduced. You saw deferral of a whole number of things that you would otherwise remit to help cash flow, as Andrea said. So it's a very, I'll say, current and reflective of the need fiscal update. There's tons in it. So I'll just stop there and take us where the audience wants us to go.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Appreciate that. Rocco, what is your take on this, mister?
Sure. Just a couple things. Then one, to reiterate Andrea's point, this is a Team Canada approach. No one level of government, and not just government alone, is going to deal with this. Everyone's got to do their part because, two, it is a health crisis first and an economic crisis second. So it makes the economic crisis very different than the ones we've seen before. The old playbook, when you go into a recession, where you have a shock to demand and underemployed capacity, factories, offices, stores, unemployed people, is to prime the pump, is to have big infrastructure projects, hire a bunch of people, have a multiplier effect. We can't do that this time because we are at the same time asking people to stay home. And so what needs to happen, and again, this is a time when cash absolutely is king. We have to float money to people so individuals can continue to meet their obligations, rent, put food on the table, take care of their families, and also so that businesses can survive through this, because we will get through this together. There will be an end to the health crisis, and then we have to rebuild. So the key is to keep as much of the economy whole so that when we get to the other side of this, we're able to rebuild quickly. And so the emphasis on cash is absolutely critical. And deferrals are fantastic for the short term, but we all recognize, and this is why we're thrilled at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, that the Ontario government, the federal government, everyone understands this is a first phase. Then we follow depending on what and where this goes, because much more will be needed if it goes long. The average small business, medium-sized business in Ontario has 25 days, 26 days of cash. And so you can say, look, I'm going to defer, but if this goes months and not weeks, at the end of that, there's going to still be a bill to pay or an additional loan to take, and a small business person is going to say, I can't do it. So we're watching, we're looking, but we're very pleased with the steps that were taken yesterday.
Excellent. Thank you, Rocco. Appreciate that. Okay, so just a reminder to everybody to submit a question to the moderator. Please choose the option with your Zoom platform and type out your question. I'll read the questions and I will direct them to the panelists for a response. So we'll start with one question here. And the question is, in regards to the $2,000 a month that was announced yesterday, and now as I look at this, I know it's from a federal perspective, but we'll see if you guys have a take on it. I have concerns about what is going on along with the red tape. Can you assure us that it will be open to everyone that is being affected, or is it going to be only those with families that are below the poverty line? Brick and mortar retail store businesses that have massive expenses above and beyond what an aggressive commercial push can provide. will it also be open to them? And again, I say, as I look at this, I understand this is the 2,000 was from the federal perspective. And I don't think there was true clarity on it either yesterday, because we've reached out also to our MPs. That the original outtake on it was that it's 2,000 for those that will have no income. So we're looking for clarification. When you say no income, do they have absolutely zero? Or if somebody is on EI, is that a derivative of income and therefore they wouldn't qualify? And again, I know it's federal, but the question's thrown out. I don't know if any of you panelists have an answer or thought on that.
I don't have a current answer on that. All that I can really say is that Andrea and I are working with Doug Shipley and John Broussard daily to try to marry the information coming in so that when somebody phones any of our offices, we have concrete answers on either level. And I don't have that answer, so I suspect that we don't have clarity yet.
Okay.
There isn't. The one comment I would make, and it's something that we've been pushing together with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Business Council, the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and that is that the balance right now on income support has been largely to expand EI and expand things like the $2,000. And our preference would be, and every day counts because we've already had over 1 million people apply for EI under the new conditions. Our preference is for the federal government to do much more significant than the 10% wage subsidy, keep people on the payrolls, because people know they can get their paycheck from their employer on a weekly basis, not go through an application process, not have to wait at precisely the time when all of those bureaucrats are also having to work from home because of the healthcare crisis. And so goodness knows how long that's going to take. The more automatic, the more efficient we make it, the quicker we then bounce out at the end of this. And the difference in the amount of money that needs to be spent is not that great versus the efficiency that would be delivered. We'll keep pushing on that point to give people clarity.
Okay, thanks, Rocco. Another question here. I understand that WSIB can be deferred until the end of August. What are the exact tax payments that can be deferred by businesses that you're aware of? And again, I'll toss that out to any of the panelists.
Do you want me to start, Doug?
Sure.
Okay, so you're correct in terms of WSIB. We invested $1.9 billion for the deferral for 6 months on WSIB specifically. One of the things mentioned in the budget was different deferrals that businesses would have access to. They're all listed on page 57, and I don't want to get any missed or wrong, so I will read them. So as of April 1st, you can defer the following provincially administrative taxes, which is the employer health tax, the tobacco, fuel, gas, insurance premium tax, the retail sales tax, insurance contracts and benefit plans tax, and any taxes on beer, wine, spirits, etc. As you know, something the restaurant and businesses have asked us to do is to be able to deliver spirits and alcohol to people's door. It's something they'd asked for, so this is in response to that. The other thing
along with delivery of food.
Delivery of food, of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyone who can operate online, we are saying in terms of the essential and non-essential lists, you can still operate whether you're doing delivery. If you're a food business, you can do pickup. So that includes now alcohol pickup and delivery. The other thing we've been working on in terms of businesses like the hotel industry is I was on a phone call with the Minister of Tourism this morning, and Minister Downey was on that as well, with all the tourism providers. And a good thing, we're talking about working together and how this is a multi-pronged approach. Well, we're working with hotel industries to understand what capacity they have. So when it comes to a vulnerable sector like shelter and supports, we know how many rooms we have available in the capacity, which is great. So you see that kind of approach. But from the economic side, an additional relief for businesses in addition to deferrals, you've seen a lot of municipalities talk about property tax deferral. That's huge. But one thing that got missed is municipalities are going to need money to do that. And there's also what's called an impact assessment that's due. It was due for reassessment this year. So one of the things that was in the economic statement yesterday was the fact that that assessment is actually going to be delayed as well. So no need to worry. So for those of you who are like, great, my municipality passed property tax deferral, but when impact does a reassessment, I'm gonna pay double. You don't have to worry about that part. It has been deferred.
Andrea, Doug, do you want to add anything to that, or?
Well, just there's a ton of stuff in there. I mean, there's just a ton. So no, I think we got lots of questions. So let's get the questions. Happy to answer them.
Okay, and just for the people that have tuned in, you know, just a gentle reminder, and our panelists will do their best to try and accommodate your questions. We're getting an awful lot of questions here that are on a financial or the financial level in regards to the federal side. We're getting questions on the GST. We're getting questions on EI, and I will certainly pass some of these on. But again, this is a provincial. We won't call it a budget. Let me know we're an economic update. Thanks, Doug. So this is a provincial economic update. So we're looking at what the province is doing to assist, and questions that you may have in regards to what the province is doing. Our panelists here are obviously going to be more aware of what the province is doing, you know, from a first-hand knowledge than what the feds are doing. Rocco may have a different perspective because he's sort of forced to cover all sectors there. What help is there for employees that have lost their jobs directly because of COVID-19?
Well, I'll start with that. The EI stuff, which, as you mentioned, is federal. There's been some adjustments there. What we've tried to do is deal with some of what I call the input costs. So we've reduced hydro. We've reduced other fees. We've put off things that are due. We've tried to leave money in people's
Interest
hands.
on student loans, for instance.
Yeah.
And $200 to parents with kids who are having to stay home because of closures, $250 if those children have special needs.
It's exactly that kind of stuff. And there's quite a few of them.
And I think a point that I've heard a lot about is if governments in all levels of community support or different levels of government, if we can help the employer will be able to help their employees meet their obligations. And so what I mean by that is we've got to kind of work together, because if we can support the economic side of this and the health side of this, it's better off for everyone. And then people can reach their obligation. We've heard a lot about rent, for instance, and while Minister Downey has really worked hard on the eviction side of things and ensure that everyone has a shelter, at the end of the day, you've got to remember, you know, actually who also owns that property. And if they can't go to the banks and pay, the bank's going to seize that property. So it's a lose-lose for everyone.
Right.
So just being mindful of those, and we just have to, you know, be a community and support one another in all of this. And some of it can just be discussed with the employer to figure out those arrangements when it comes to either having a job to go back to the end of the day. If you have to take care of a loved one, or you have to take care of a child, know that in the protecting workers legislation that we as a provincial government passed, you can take leave from your work. You can. To take care of that child, because, you know, frankly, our provincial government has closed schools and daycare for the safety of that child. But obviously, if they're under the age of 12, they can't stay home they can't stay home by themselves. And so, of course, we're concerned about that. And so that those supports have been put in place so that those jobs are protected. I will note that doesn't mean you get paid if you take a leave to take care of your child. Those arrangements you'd have to make with your employer, and certainly an application towards EI. But what we've seen on the federal level is, in terms of who qualifies for EI, those qualifications have been expanded, and you can get support for for taking care of your children, not only from the provincial government, as we saw yesterday in the statement, we can also get support to the federal level. So that will help with substituting income supports if you have kids.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrea. The next one's a little bit lengthy, but I do want to read it word for word because I do think it's going to affect a lot of people in this province. So I'll start off here. Hi. Julie Kelly, ED of the Severn Sound Environmental Association. First, thank you to the province and our 2 MPPs for all that you are doing, and to the chambers for keeping us all informed. We have transitioned our small team of 8 workers from a home, and our staff are adapting well. Our challenge is internet access in our rural communities. 2 of us do not have internet access. I'm having to use a Rocket Hub, and that is a very expensive option. Bell has not lifted the cost of data on mobile data, so this option will not sustain us moving forward or for long in our current unstable fiscal environment. As a not-for-profit municipal service board, will there be a way for us to offset these costs?
That's a great question. I just want to start, Julie. Hi, Julie. It's really emphasizing the things that are lacking in our economy. And broadband is such a pivotal piece of doing business nowadays. And now we're seeing the ramifications of not having it everywhere. So whether there's going to be, I think your question was really, is there going to be some offset, some funding, something like that? I haven't seen that yet. But again, we're phase one. I'm going to take that idea back and have that conversation.
Perfect. Thanks, Doug. And there's actually one here directed right at you. Could Mr. Downey address anything he is working on to get the banks to accept electronic documents for real estate transactions? I know this is off topic, but many of the banks are not accepting anything except wet signatures and in-person ID, therefore forcing lawyers to meet with clients rather than conducting remote meetings. Doug?
Yeah, this is a real estate issue in terms of trying to close deals and get things done. I'm hearing from lawyers across Ontario on this. There are some banks that are actually refusing to do anything unless it's wet ink, and they won't take wired funds. There's some vendor lawyers who won't take documents electronically or wired funds. It really doesn't make sense. Banking is federal. Trying to have that conversation through our counterparts, it's a challenge. And some transactions, if you're doing a simple mortgage, you're not actually buying or selling. The banks are saying we're not going to let a lawyer do it unless they do it live. So they're getting frozen out of the deal, and they're going to FNF, or they're going to some of these underwriters. It's really not the way we're trying to do business in Ontario, certainly in this environment.
Okay. Next question. Why won't the province match the federal 10% wage subsidy for small business? And now when it says why won't, I'll also throw it out there, or will they?
Our approach has been a bit different. I don't know, Andrea, if you want to start. Our approach has been taking away costs from business to allow them to do what they need to do. But
yeah, and I'll reiterate again, if government helps through the employer, that will help everyone meet their obligations, right? And so we're sort of been focusing on the protecting job sides of this, and the federal government's been focused on income supports. But look, we've got to look at our financials and how we have to balance this coming out of it. We're projected by 2021, our deficit in this province is going to be 20.5 billion. So we've exuded historic prudence in this economic update that happened yesterday. Minister Downey touched on it. There's 1 billion contingency for COVID, 1.3 contingency altogether. This is a historic contingency fund. So the Premier has gone out and said he will do what it takes to help Ontarians, but we have to understand what's in the framework of the province to do versus the federal government. And I would emphasize that when it does come to income supports, the majority of that can be done through the federal government. The Minister of Finance has said they have the printing press, they have the ability to provide more of that than we do. So we're doing what's within our means, and certainly if we need to expand our means, we have the ability to do that.
Okay, great.
At the end of the day, the federal level of government is the one with the most borrowing room, if not then the printing of money, and we're talking about really big numbers. If you look at other jurisdictions that have gone the wage subsidy route, Denmark, the UK, Switzerland, and others, they're upwards of 75, 80% of salary subsidies, capped, obviously. They're not there to underwrite $1 million executive salaries, but up to a cap. Just to give you a quick math, Ontario is roughly half of the Canadian economy, say $900 billion. Roughly half of that is salary. So you're looking at $10 billion a week. And that's 100% of it. Now, and then just do the math, what 10% is, what 20%, 10% is $1 billion a week.
Wow.
Thanks for the context, Rocco. That's great.
Yeah. I'm going to actually direct this next one to you, Rocco, even though it's a neutral one, but I'd like to hear your perspective, and then we can put it over to the other panelists. And it starts with all these deferrals are all great in theory. They help us get through the crunch, but it will require an economy afterwards that allows us to grow profitably meaning people will actually have money to spend. Do you not agree that even if we survive these closures, very little will be able to ramp up those deferral payments? People will have less money to spend at the end of this. Rocco?
Look, it's one of the reasons we have been pushing on the wage subsidy piece at the federal level, is to try to keep companies as whole as possible and to try to keep the income support levels up to the highest level possible, so that it's not priming the pump, but it doesn't put you so underwater when you come out that you're going to take a much longer period. The economists are telling us now, in all likelihood, it's not what they'd call a V type recovery, which is a sharp up after, say, the 2008, 2009. It's much more of a U shaped, where we will bounce along before building back up. And the steps that the province has taken, that the feds have taken, and the more steps that will be required, and that both levels of government have said, this is installment one, there will be more needed the longer this goes. But all the more reason, again, we come back to the health crisis aspect of it, all the more reason each of us has to do our part to starve this virus by staying at home, by practicing, I like to call it physical distancing, not social distancing, because quite frankly, I'm on the phone to my mom every day. I hate the fact that I can't hug her, but at least she can hear my voice. That's important, and that's important for all of us. If we do that, we're gonna slow this, we're gonna get out the other end, and then we're gonna keep pushing government to do their part. This is why, you know, it's interesting when the economy is growing and people are saying, well, why doesn't government spend more money? Why not, you know, get bigger deficits, more debt, and just crank it up so everyone is even better off? It's times like this that remind us why it is so important to be prudent in good times, because the bad times come. Now, this is caused for health reasons. It could have been an economic cycle. This is where you want to have the economic room to deal with the facts like it's $10 billion a week. And when you give it away in the good times, it's not there when you need it.
Right. Thanks, Rocco. Another question here is, the notice I received from Public Health on March 17th instructing bars and restaurants to close until March 31st. As the numbers of corona cases continue to rise, is this date realistic? I'm not a panelist and I could answer that, but that's not my job here, so I'll turn it over to you guys.
Well, I'll start with who does what. So the public health has put out recommendations as opposed to orders. And there's some confusion in different parts of the province about what public health is saying, and they're working really hard to be on the same page. But just be aware that they send out recommendations generally. The closure of bars and restaurants, which has been critical, and we've learned from other jurisdictions, is likely going to be longer. And we're seeing the Minister of Education talking about schools maybe being longer than the original projected date. So to be under no illusions, we're not flipping the switch on March 31st and we're all back in business just overnight. That's why we did the alcohol reform, the delivery with food, to help some of those locations survive, because it is a core part of it. I filed that reg this morning, so it's effective now. And I just want to add a little piece on that. It can be done through the delivery service, but there's still age checking and there's safeguards built in. So it's not the Wild West. We're just sort of the next step. And all of these things are temporary measures. It's only effective until the end of the year. So things will get reviewed as we go. But to go back to the core question, are we going to be back in business March 31st? I highly doubt it.
Thanks, Doug. All right, what advice can you give a small landlord or property owner that depends on rental income to keep the bills paid if the tenant is unable to pay? The majority of lenders are requiring the borrower to show hardship prior to payment deferrals. Should landlords still be servicing notice to tenants for their late payments?
I can start with that, or Rocco, if you want to talk about what the banks are doing in deferred mortgage and stuff.
Sure.
We're not in a perfect situation.
Yeah, it's not an easy, the key here is communication. and understanding there's going to be pain. Everyone is doing their best to work on it, but look at you try to lock out a tenant at this point, and you know the likelihood of you finding someone to replace them in the near term is highly unlikely in current circumstances. So it's not to say you should eat it all, but understand there needs to be that communication ongoing. I know of small landlords who've proactively gone out to their banks and said, look, this is the nature of my tenants. They're service businesses. They're virtually all non-essential services. They are not going to be in a position to pay. I know that on case-by-case basis through these communications, they've come to deferral of principal payments. They're keeping interest payments going. Others are doing a little bit of pain sharing. There will be more done, but this is one where you really need to work with your relationships, with your banking relationship and with your tenants. Keep those lines of communications going. We want to get out the other end and understand there is a tough reality between now and then.
Yeah, and to be fair, the conversation is not over at the provincial level. So
No.
there are many conversations happening. Certainly.
And the property tax piece is a very helpful one as well on the deferral from a cash flow perspective for landlords.
Excellent, thank you. Andrea, I'm going to direct this to you, and not that it came that way, but you're just sitting there looking a little on the board side, so we're going to re-engage you. Has the government began thinking about long-term strategies to protect the peoples of Ontario from similar wide-scale crisis in the future? For examples, in my mind, would be greater financial protection for freelancers, greater investment in healthcare and health education, rent control protections, high-speed internet in rural areas, etc.
So, I mean, provincially, we've been able to be very proactive on a few things. We have tried to expand broadband in rural areas through the SWIFT program. It's ongoing. I mean, in terms of timeline, no one could predict that this was going to happen. So there was a lot of things we didn't get to accomplish to date. So not all rural communities were able to get broadband hookup, but certainly some were underway. So that's a positive, and that's work we're going to continue to do. You look at our hydro policy. Before we announced hydro rate reductions yesterday, we already invested, $5.6 billion to freeze hydro rates at the cost of inflation. That was done well before COVID-19 happened. Certainly a lot of work has been done on that front. In terms of scaling up Ontario and skills trades, we've done a lot on the employment sector. You saw that through our job numbers. And on that topic, I did want to mention that skilling up our workforce and coming out of this is going to be very important. In the economic statement that was released yesterday, there was $100 million set aside for Employment Ontario to help with skills training, specifically apprenticeships and skills trades during this time. If people wanted to switch and learn a different skill, this is the time to do it so they can come out of this ahead. That's going to be very important. In terms of other ideas, look, I mean, if you have ideas, Doug and I are constantly doing roundtables with the chamber when it comes to red tape and financial ideas. So please send them to us, send them by email or give us a call if it's too daunting to type. That's understandable. I do it all the time. But like this is coming out of this, there'll be a lot of ideas, and certainly I imagine Doug can speak more to this than I can, but I imagine there'll be a big debrief on lessons learned and how we get ahead.
And just to reinforce that, Stan Cho, who is the MPP for Willowdale and the Parliamentary Assistant for Finance, has an active file saying any ideas people have for the back end of this. He wants them. We're collecting them now. So absolutely.
If I can chime in for a second, we're a nonpartisan organization, as you know, Todd. We work with everyone, but I can say unequivocally that this government has been open at every corner, at every turn, in good times and bad, to ideas from the chamber, from our members, from businesses generally. So I know, we often hear we're open to ideas. I've seen the action on a regular basis, and I encourage everyone to take them up on it. They will listen.
Thank you. Okay, next question. How is the province dealing with potential shortfalls of equipment for frontline staff?
Can I jump in on this? I can tell you, the Premier is good at a lot of things. What he's really good at is supply chains. That's what he did before he came to government. To hear him talk about how he's moving the supply chains with Minister Vic Fideli, they're sourcing things from all over the world, and the manufacturers in Ontario have been unbelievable. I got emails from guys I went to law school with saying, "Hey, I'm the whatever at this company. Can we retool and help?" We fed all that stuff in to Central, and Giles Gerson, who's deputy minister for Vic Fideli, they're reaching out, and we have companies. We have a company in Barrie. I don't want to name names, but I have 3 companies here, right in Barrie, that have switched their supply lines to provide the products that we need in the front line. And that's in addition to what South Medic's doing, which is a fantastic company. They're going full bore on the pieces that we need most. So there's just a ton of ways that we're trying to get there. And quite frankly, I think it's going to help us flex our industrial muscles a little bit.
Look, I want to reiterate that we've started a whole series of what we're calling #difference makers. And those are our members and businesses across the province who've stepped up, changed lines, converted production. There's the development of a made in Ontario ventilator to meet the demand, because let's face it, this is a global crisis. It's not just an Ontario crisis. And so it's not simply a matter of, well, go and order certain things that are currently made in Italy, because guess what? They need every single one that they're producing for their own hospitals, for their own frontline workers. And so there's been a massive effort underway. A lot of red tape has to be cut and is being cut to make sure that's happening. But business is leaning in on this. We're doing our part everywhere we can.
And if I may add, if you're currently a manufacturer and you're watching this webinar and you can help, we have ontario.ca/Ontario Together, where you can pitch in if you want to switch your assembly line to help, and you're able to do that. Please apply through that portal. And if you are a manufacturer that does need, in terms of financial support, I found out today, the Next Generation of Manufacturers Canada are putting out a $50 million super cluster funding support for companies, where they could give you immediate support if you can do your production line between April and end of June 2020. They can fund up to 100% of your manufacturing efforts. If it's beyond June, they might only be able to fund 50%. But that's an example of different areas within our country that are coming up, stepping up together to help. So if you can help, I do call on you to visit the Ontario Together website and pitch in.
Great, thanks, Andrea. Next question. What do we have in place to help tourism or festival events in the province that may suffer through this crisis?
Man.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Doug and I were on a conference call this morning with Minister MacLeod. Before that call, she was on a call throughout tourism and culture folks all across the province. That is a big lens right now in terms of refocusing some of the cultural, tourism, and sports funds that we have within that budget to help immediate needs. So Minister MacLeod is actively listening to all the different groups within her portfolio and certainly going to be coming up with some solutions. The good part about that portfolio is she has done a lot of upfront work to be able to deliver some funds and repurpose funds for immediate needs versus some of the things that always been there historically that didn't actually pay dividends to companies. And they're going to need that right now. So those changes are coming. I'm not in a position to give specifics, but certainly she's definitely working on it.
Here's a perfect example of listening. I was on that conference call with Minister MacLeod a week ago. There were a number of ideas raised at that time, and I was on the one today with her, with 1,000 of my closest friends from the chamber and the tourism industry and cultural and arts and sports across Ontario. And literally in that week, there had been almost a doubling of the funds reoriented to help. There's still more that needs to be done, but really fantastic listening and working on the fly. Like as I said the other day to President of the Treasury Board, Peter Bethlenfalvy, said, when there is no playbook, the best thing that you can have are great players. And great players at all levels of government and in business, in civil society, in our healthcare system, they're all stepping up. There is no playbook. We're doing the best we can. We're learning every day, and we're listening to get better every day.
Excellent. Thanks, Rocco. We've had a few questions in regards to the GST/HST, and again, I'm not sure if anybody here can discuss that or has any thoughts on it, because again, more of a federal thing. One of the points I'll bring both up is, can HST or GST remittances be deferred? And somebody has also noted that they heard there may be a credit given for HST remitted to the government. Does anybody have any information on either one of these?
I don't know the answer to that.
No.
We're pressing on this exact issue federally, but we don't have an answer yet.
Okay. The next one will also be in regards to EI, which is again federal, but they do bring in the province on a question. So I'll ask the question here as it's laid out, and it states, there have been current concerns in regards to EI claims from temporary employees. These employees are from places like Honda. They've all been laid off, but when filing claims, their EI claims are going in as, in quote, regular claims, which are hit with a 2-week delay window. Is the province looking at fixing this so these temporary workers will also have the same waiting window closed out to help them immediately?
Again, it's federal. I don't know where they've drawn the line on that waiting period. It's something I can ask Doug Shipley and loop back to somebody, but I don't have the answer.
Again, this is it is at the federal level. They've not moved on it yet. It's been raised. It's been particularly raised from the agricultural community because there's a lot of use of temporary workers, and there's a lot of use of foreign temporary workers throughout southwestern Ontario among the greenhouse operators, et cetera. And these folks are now having to stay on a quarantined basis as well. And so they want to make sure that that they're not left without means. So this is an active discussion right now.
Great, thank you. Next question. There seems to be, excuse me, there seems to be a lot of gray area on what is deemed essential services. I have a whole bunch of different points I could bring up, but I would just throw this out to the panelists. What are your thoughts on the list that was provided, and can you provide any clarifications as to why some are on and others aren't?
Doug, do you want me to start?
Yeah, you can start, and then I'll add.
So I would say a good way to look at the individuals on the list is the one-pronged approach is supply chain. The other part is lessons learned from other jurisdictions, and the other support is what is going to be needed in different communities, be they rural or urban, and that type of those type of circumstances. So in terms of supply chain, the best example I can give is, a glue factory. Why would they stay open? Well, they need to be able to glue the boxes together, which box the hand sanitizers that are very much needed in healthcare sectors. That's one example. An example, I was also locally, hardware stores end up selling a lot of supplies that people will need during this time. And in rural areas, that is where they get their supplies. They don't have the luxury of having a Walmart or a Smart Center. So there's that to take into consideration in terms of supply chain. The other thing that was mentioned is if you have questions as to if you're essential, if you're not essential, I'll list the number now, but I can pass it over to the chamber as well to send out to everyone. But if you have questions, there's a dedicated number that we've given out as a government for anyone, 1-888-444-3659 if you have any questions. But for the most part, it was done for things that are essential. Some of it's mental health and health oriented. We had the one of the health professionals came out with a statement in terms of alcohol. A lot of people were asking, why is that essential? Well, the reality is that some people do unfortunately suffer and have capacity issues when it comes to alcohol consumption. And the reality is are they going to go to the hospital because of the massive withdrawal, or can we help? And so we chose the we want to help. The other thing we learned from other jurisdictions was they didn't include laundry mats, and laundry mats are essential for individuals to be able to have clean clothing, which allows them to protect themselves and be able to have that essential service. So that was also included on our list.
Yeah, so we could talk about each of the items, Todd, but I do think if people aren't sure if they're on the list, first check the list, look at it carefully. If you're still not sure, you can phone that number that Andrea gave. And if you're still not sure, there is a process to have clarification by a subcommittee of cabinet. So we want to keep as much moving as possible. We want to keep the businesses moving in a safe way. Health and safety being the touchstone for everything. So again, we could debate anything on the list in particular, but those are the touchstones. Health and safety, keep as much of the economy moving as possible, keep people employed, keep money in their hands.
And I will just emphasize that if you are on the essential list, it doesn't mean you cannot be running the distancing policy, the clean hands policy. It's upon the employer to be able to, if they are the essential list and they choose to stay open because of that, the protective measures have to be put in place. Otherwise, the Premier was pretty clear about it. You'll likely get shut down.
Yeah, and I want to underscore that point. The Premier made it pretty clear, particularly with respect to construction sites on that point, and making sure that there are safety measures in place, protection for the workers in place, or he will shut it down. I do have to say that this is an area that the Chamber has some misgivings around because when you look at supply chain, we have members obviously who some are small and very local, and others who work across the country and across provincial borders. And there are frustrations that there are different lists in different provinces. The feds, in a sense, allowed this to happen by saying, look, we want the provinces to be able to reflect their local requirements and necessities. So we don't want a Bigfoot and have it all the same. But that does make it very confusing and problematic for many companies who have supply chains that go across provinces. In some areas, some of their supply chain is considered essential, others not. And that is a problem. Clarification is key. Again, it means a little more work for each and every one of our members who is unsure. I mean, it seemed crazy. Boat repair, absolutely essential. Boat production itself, no. So if you're an operation that does both and you're not quite sure, and your lawyers want to avoid liability, again, you got a phone.
Great, thank you. Next question. Are there any concerns about essential government services being affected during this pandemic?
Absolutely. In my world, in terms of the justice sector, we've pedaled to the metal on people incarcerated. Just 70% of the population in provincial jails are on remand or bail. Like they're up for bail, 70%. So those are people that have not been convicted of anything yet, if at all. And so it has affected our priority and where we put our resources. And we're putting laser focus on automating everything that we can. The Court of Appeal now is fully automated. The Superior Court did its last in-person item yesterday. We're now moving to get the provincial courts entirely automated. So yeah, it's totally affected our priority list.
The other thing I would add, though, is there's some work that had been done ahead of COVID-19, and that was all the Service Ontario services, right? We, as a government, put a lot of those services online, and our big campaign was to get people out of line and online, so they can do things with their health card and driver's license. But what I will say is that if it is about health card renewal, driver's license renewal, your sticker for your car, we did make an announcement to say that all those things are now deferred. So if you have an expired health card, you will not be denied healthcare services. And likewise, if your sticker is not up for renewal, not to worry as much because all those were delayed. We obviously know that this is a very important situation and we don't want to cause people added stress.
All right, next question we directed right to Doug. And sort of, I think it backs onto that last one and says, is there any chance that provincial court services will be suspended completely?
I don't think so. We're automating, we're functioning in the automated world now. So we're prioritizing in terms of things like family law. We want to deal with the urgent and emergency matters. So we have to do some prioritization, but we're not going to see an outright total shutdown. That's not feasible. There's things that need to be dealt with, and that's not going to change.
Right. Okay, I'm looking at the questions here, and still the majority of them coming up I'm looking at are on a federal perspective. So I'll give people a few more minutes to weigh in on the provincial side, hopefully. But I'm going to throw this out to the panelists right now from just some general commentary, anything that you'd like to bring up in the meantime. We have 5 or 8 minutes left to go, but I'd like to stay on the provincial aspect of it for right now if we can.
Maybe while we're waiting for the next question, Todd, I want to reiterate, we're taking our cues from the medical professionals. As much as we're making decisions and trying to adjust and prioritize, we're listening to the science and we're listening to the people who work in that world. So sometimes we'll make a decision that you might kind of go, why would you do that? Well, there's a reason behind it, and whether we get to communicate that reason every time or not is probably not possible. But I just wanted to reiterate the importance. The doctors, the nurses, the paramedics, the PSWs. All the people on the front lines that are making this possible are being guided by the chief medical officer.
And I'll just add from a financial perspective, a big part of the economic statement yesterday was to kind of send in terms of selling Ontario bonds in the bond market. A lot of it had to do with that, so that we are in we're in a better financial situation. The provincial government had borrowed a bit before this, the COVID pandemic, and so it looks like we will have to borrow more coming out of this. But what I cautioned for what this means, the more the Ontario government borrows, that means interest rates, and government has to make up for those funds somehow. So when people ask us to do more, and as much as we want to do more and we're ready to do it, I would have a bit of a caution for what that's going to mean for interest, our interest payments as a province, how that money is going to be had, and the fact that, you know, not to get partisan, but our government's very not in the business of taxing, increasing taxes or taxing people. So certainly prudent measures will have to be taken. So everything we give now has consequences later. So we just have to temper that a bit and find out how we can stop this health pandemic. And that way we can help the economy coming out of this and through this.
Great, thanks, Andrea. The question here, and I'm not really sure if anybody can answer this or if it's in your line, but with the potential of a domino effect in the real estate market, does OREA have any directives to offer? I'm not sure if any of you would be familiar with their aspects, or if you have comments.
I'll just make a comment of what I've seen. I did see OREA did put out a statement, and I've heard this too locally, is people were still doing open houses, and it caused a bit of a discomfort amongst different real estate agents, ones who were doing it online versus ones that were actually going in person. So OREA did put out a statement saying any open houses in person, do not do them. That was clear in the statement. If they want to do virtual, by all means go ahead, but do not do in-person open houses.
Again, it's an area that's we're in new territory a little bit. I can tell you there's a real estate seminar for lawyers tomorrow. It's a lawyers put on by Sid Troyster and a few of the leading lights. They have 1,800 people signed up for it. That's how much interest there is in the shifting ground.
Real estate, yeah.
I'd tune in to Tim Hudak's show on CFRB on Sunday and ask him the question. He's the president of OREA. Perfect.
Yeah, certainly a lot of concerns in our region with that. And in regards to the construction sector too, you know, many questions obviously to the chamber and to the province itself in regards to construction sites. And I think the Premier nailed it the other day when he said, you know, we can't certainly shut down all construction sites. What's most important right now is shelter for people. And you've got people that are literally days or weeks away from moving into a new home, and the consequences of them not being able to get into that home, and the consequence of the person, you know, who's leaving their house and somebody's trying to move into that house, the domino effect could be catastrophic. And I was glad to see the Premier said, you know, that we'll work with that, and certainly it's a case-by-case basis, and ensuring, you know, number one, that the sites are clean and the people are doing their safe distancing from each other, as Rocco mentioned. I mean, this is hugely important, and the safe distancing is also, you know, a major part, which all of us have been discussing here.
What I would add to the construction element is there's been a lot more inspectors that have been hired because of the Premier's call to add seriousness to the situation. But another measure that's been talked about is the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And under that act, it gives workers the right to refuse to work if they believe they're unsafe. And the first stage of the application in that, you are entitled to be paid. The second stage, you'd have to wait and see. But if concerns do exist, there's phone numbers out there that exist for concerns. And the one that you would address those comments to would be 1-877-202-008. But again, we want to ensure that people also have shelter and a home to go to after all of this. And so it's finding that balance.
Right.
You are never forced to work. You should never be forced to work in a dangerous environment, and what you perceive to be dangerous, that's something you have to call out.
Okay. Throw one last one out there before we go into a close. It says a concern within our community, and again, I watched this on the news myself, is the littering of gloves, wipes, etc. on the streets and parking lots. What can be done on this to get the message across that is not the way to stop the spread? Mayor Lehman himself posted yesterday that wipes, gloves cannot be put in green bins, must be put in the garbage, but I'm sure the message isn't getting out fast enough, and I agree with this this individual here, Joelle. What you see in the news is just, it's horrendous that people even think that's okay. And I mean, I almost look at Doug like this and say, can you put bylaw out there? And also, I'm going to be blunt when I say this. We have a sign up at my office. I'm in the construction sector, and the sign says, you can't fix stupid. And you just wonder, like, people are thinking, you're wearing those gloves and masks to protect yourself. If you get something on those gloves or masks, you're now discarding it just in a public place, a grocery cart, whatever, that somebody else has to deal with. And it's just like, what do you do with people?
I think you answered your own
Says
question.
it all.
Well, I would say, I mentioned this on a webinar this week, but you can't legislate common sense. But what I will pitch is that I have a private members bill that is now law, which is a day-wide day of action against litter. And it's for these exact reasons, where we need to educate young people, we need to educate our communities, educate people in our country as a nation, that like litter, our landfills, it's disgusting what's happening out there. People have no respect for their property or what's around them, and we need to build that in again. And it has come to this fact where we are going to have an advocacy day, and a day where everyone comes out in the communities. We've seen throughout Barrie, and I've seen that in Innisfil too, where family members are going out safely, they are exercising physical distance, and they are picking up litter themselves. This is what it's come down to, is individual community members have gone out. But the best way to prevent all of that is not to litter in the first place. So certainly before this pandemic hit, our province was taking things like litter really seriously. My bill is one of those steps, but this is a great webinar to emphasize that, we shouldn't accept and should be socially acceptable to litter at all.
Okay, and I'm going to start with a couple of closing comments, and we'll do it in reverse order. So Rocco, we'll start with you.
Look at stay safe, keep the ideas and questions coming. Literally all levels of government are building the plane while flying it. It is unprecedented, and as the Minister of Finance said the other day, in exceptional circumstances, exceptional measures are required. We know that that all levels have said there can be, round 2, round 3 as needed, as this and if this lengthens. So keep the ideas, keep the pressure on, and to our friends in government, keep listening and keep reacting in the way that you have been.
Excellent. Thank you, Rocco. Mr. Downey.
Yeah, health and safety is number one. Look after your family, look after your neighbors, look after, neighbors that you may not know yet. See if people need help, reach out. But I also want to throw a pitch in for mental health. I've read some really compelling articles talking about the grief that people are going through with the uncertainty, what they call anticipatory grief. They're not sure where we're headed yet, and it causes them anxiety. If you're feeling that, then reach out to somebody, make sure that you're getting, a lifeline to somebody. Do a webinar. I have friends and their kids are having Zoom parties. Just stay connected, as Rocco is with his parents.
Excellent. Where were you, Andrea?
Right, and I just say this is an issue to do with all humanity, and we've got to rely on one another, support one another, and check on each other, like Mr. Downey was saying. But we're all in this together, and we'll get out of it together. But we can't start pointing the finger at one person or the other. That's going to cause conflicts and division, and this is the time.
Except the idiot litterers.
Conflict can't happen. No litterers can happen. But we do got to work together. So I will leave you with the website again, which is ontario.ca/Ontario Together. If you have ideas of how to get more health supplies, equipment out there to curb this health pandemic. And if you have any updated questions or anything for me, email or call. My office staff are always available. I'm always available. I'm available 24/7, really. So please do reach out if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. And the information you gave at the websites and the phone numbers, the Chamber has already posted those on our site, so it's there for anybody here or anybody else that can access it right away. Again, a great big thank you to all the panelists today. I know how incredibly busy all of you are. I mean, it's day and night. I see what's going on with everybody, and it's great that you can take a few minutes to certainly help the business community and answer some of the questions, calm some of the fears. So with that, in closing, again, thank you for everybody for joining us and for the work that you're doing in your businesses here every day. We urge every leader in our community to immediately shift your focus to the singular objective of slowing the pace and the transmission of this virus. Both our federal and provincial governments have enacted measures that will only be effective if all employers step up and do their part to protect our provincial health and welfare. All levels of government have expressed and committed to protect businesses, employees, and every Canadian to ensure that we can all go through this together. I also strongly urge everyone to stay at home, avoid any travel to cottages to stop the spread of this virus. The hospitals and grocery stores in those areas are not equipped at this time of year to deal with those influx of people, especially at this time, and they'll quickly become dangerously overwhelmed if they get mass influx. The Barrie Chamber and the Sandbox are here to help all of you through this. Please feel free to email or call if you need anything else. And again, we implore everyone to please shop local. We need now more than ever for you to support our local businesses, whether it's a takeout from a restaurant, a gift certificate, a gift card, whatever it is. That little influx of cash will go a long way. You have no idea how far it will go and what it means to each and every single business out there. And with that, again, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Todd.
Thank you.